My parents forced my grandma to hand over her pension, then left her in an abandoned park. From the very beginning, my grandma, Eleanor Dawson, was the person I loved most in this world. She raised me when my parents were too busy with their own lives. She was gentle, patient, and gave me the kind of love that wrapped around me like a blanket. When I was scared, she held me. When I was sick, she stayed by my side. She was more of a parent to me than the two people who actually brought me into this world. My father, Martin Dawson, was a man who always thought about money. He measured everything in dollars and cents. My mother, Lorraine Dawson, only cared about appearances, about looking richer and better than the people around her. Together, they were cold and selfish. They had no kindness in them, and they showed no respect to the woman who had given them everything. I watched as they treated Grandma like she was in the way. They dismissed her words, ignored her feelings, and spoke about her as if she wasn't standing right there. She would smile softly and pretend not to notice, but I saw the way her eyes dimmed. I saw how it hurt her, even though she never said a single cruel thing in return. To me, Grandma was the heart of our home. She smelled of lavender soap, hummed the same tune when she cooked, and told stories that made me feel safe. Every little detail about her is carved into my memory because she was the one person who truly cared for me. I adored her with everything I had, and that's why it broke me to see how my parents treated her. Somewhere deep down, I think I always knew they were capable of something terrible. Their greed had no limits, their coldness no end. They didn't value people, only what they could take from them. Still, even with all that, I wasn't ready for the day they would go too far. What they did to Grandma wasn't just selfish, it was cruel beyond measure. It wasn't about unkind words or neglect. It was a betrayal so sharp that it cut through everything I believed about family. They chose to hurt the very person who had given them life, and in that moment, they revealed who they truly were. I can never forgive them for it. That choice they made changed everything for me. It showed me that some people, even those tied to us by blood, don't deserve the love we offer them. Some bonds can never be repaired. When I think about that night, about what they did to her, it still fills me with rage. But it also gave me a purpose. I couldn't stay silent, and I couldn't let them continue without facing the truth. What they did to my grandma demanded justice, and I swore I would be the one to bring it. My grandma, Eleanor, didn't have much, but she had a modest pension and a little savings left behind by my late grandpa. It was enough to cover her simple needs, and she lived carefully, never wasting a cent. To her, money was security. To my parents, it was an opportunity. I began to notice how they looked at her whenever finances were mentioned. Their eyes lingered, sharp and greedy, as if her savings weren't hers but already theirs. They circled her like vultures, waiting for the moment to swoop in. It started with small requests. My father, Martin, would sigh loudly at the dinner table about bills piling up. My mother, Lorraine, would add comments about how hard it is to keep up these days. At first, Grandma would listen quietly, nodding, sometimes offering comfort. But then the requests turned into pressure. They told her she should help out with the family, that it was only right since they took care of her. The words sounded caring on the surface, but I knew better. They weren't worried about keeping the lights on. They were thinking about vacations, expensive shopping trips, dinners at restaurants they couldn't afford without her money. I saw the hesitation on Grandma's face. She would press her lips together, her hands folding nervously in her lap. She wanted to say no. She knew she needed that money for herself. But love makes people vulnerable. She loved her children so much that she couldn't refuse them, even when it hurt her. And so slowly she began handing it over. At first, it was just a few bills here and there. Then it was larger amounts. Each time, my parents acted like it was nothing, like she owed it to them. They never said thank you. They never showed gratitude. They took it as if it was theirs by right. And every time, I watched my grandma grow a little smaller, a little quieter. One evening, I walked past her room and heard her whispering to herself. Her voice was soft, trembling. I don't want to be a burden. My heart cracked in that moment. She wasn't a burden. She was the reason I had any sense of love in my life. But my parents had made her believe she was nothing more than a wallet they could drain. I stood outside her door, unable to move, tears burning in my eyes. She thought she had to give everything she had just to earn their love. She thought she was in the way, when in truth she was the only good thing in our family. From then on, I watched even more carefully. Every shopping bag my mom carried in, every receipt for things we didn't need, every careless smile from my dad after a weekend getaway, all of it was bought with her sacrifice. And she never complained, never demanded anything back. She gave because that's who she was, and they took because that's who they were. I began to notice the change in the air around the house. Something felt heavier every day. I couldn't ignore how quickly my parents had turned Grandma's pension into their lifeline. It wasn't just help anymore, it was dependence. They treated her account like a bottomless pit, always ready to cover their wants. I started asking questions. One night, I confronted them directly. I asked why they kept taking so much, why they couldn't leave her money for her own needs. My father leaned back in his chair, smirking, and told me I didn't understand adult responsibilities. My mother nodded firmly, saying I should stop worrying about things that weren't my concern. Their tone was final, like they were above explanation. To them, I was still a child who couldn't possibly know better. But I did know better. I saw the toll it was taking on Grandma. Her hands shook more than they used to, and she seemed tired all the time. She would sit quietly in her chair, staring out the window, as if her thoughts were too heavy to share. I could see the stress pressing down on her body, stealing away the brightness she once had. Still, my parents didn't notice or didn't care. To them, she was nothing more than easy money. They wanted more control, and one day they found a way to get it. They told her it would be easier if she signed the pension account over to them. For convenience, they called it. They promised they would take care of everything, that she wouldn't have to worry about paperwork or bills anymore. I remember the panic that rose inside me when I overheard their plan. I begged her not to listen to them. I told her they weren't thinking of her, that they only wanted control of her money. My voice was shaking, desperate, but I needed her to see the truth. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Her face was full of sadness, torn between my words and her own heart. Then she said the words that broke me. "They're my children, Clara. I have to believe they love me." I wanted to scream. I wanted to make her see that love wasn't what they were showing her. But the look in her eyes told me she had already made her choice. She needed to believe in them, even if it cost her everything. When she finally signed the papers, my chest felt hollow. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, and they had taken that from her too. Watching her hand over control, watching my parents smile like they had won, I felt something inside me collapse. That moment stayed with me like a scar. I couldn't protect her from them, and she wouldn't protect herself. It was the first time I realized how deep their betrayal could go, and how powerless I felt against it. It was late one evening when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. My parents didn't know I was nearby, and I froze when I caught their words. They weren't arguing about money this time. They were talking about Grandma. My mother's voice was sharp, almost annoyed, as she said she couldn't handle having her around anymore. My father agreed, saying she had nothing left to offer. Their plan was clear. They wanted to get rid of her. I stood there, my hands trembling, hoping I had misunderstood. But the more they spoke, the colder the truth became. They didn't just want her out of the house. They wanted to abandon her, like she was disposable. My mother even suggested taking her somewhere far enough that she couldn't find her way back. My father chuckled, calling it the easiest solution. I couldn't stay silent. I stepped into the room and told them they couldn't do this, that it was cruel and heartless. I reminded them she was their mother, the woman who had raised them. But they brushed me off as if my words meant nothing. My father shook his head and told me to stop interfering in things I didn't understand. My mother's eyes were cold, and she simply said, "You'll see this is for the best." That night, they carried out their plan. I tried everything I could to stop them, but they refused to listen. They told Grandma they were taking her for a drive, speaking with forced cheerfulness. She trusted them enough to follow. I stood helpless, watching them walk her out, my chest tight with dread. They drove her to the edge of town, to a park that had long been abandoned. It was dark, quiet, and empty, the kind of place where no one would notice an old woman left alone. They left her there with no money, no phone, and no way to call for help. Then they drove away, leaving behind the person who had once been the center of our family. By the time I found out where they had taken her, it was too late. Hours had passed, and the night was cold. My heart pounded as I rushed to find her, but she wasn't there anymore. Panic set in until I got a call from the hospital. A stranger had found her sitting on a bench, shivering and weak. He had called for help, and she was taken in before anything worse could happen. When I saw her in that hospital bed, my throat closed with grief. Her face looked pale, and her body seemed so fragile. She tried to smile when she saw me, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. She didn't need to say what had happened. I already knew. The image of my parents driving away from her in that park burned itself into my mind. It was the moment I realized there was no limit to their cruelty. They had abandoned their own mother as if she was nothing, and that was something I could never forgive. I sat at her hospital bed and felt my heart break. The bright laugh I had known was gone. She looked small and tired, like someone who had been carrying heavy bags for years and set them down at last. Her hands were pale and thin, and she kept pulling the blanket up to her chin as if to hide. She looked at me and tried to smile, but it was only half a smile. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Maybe they were right. Maybe I am a burden," she said. The words hit me like a cold wind. I wanted to tell her she was not a burden, that she was everything to me, but my throat closed and I only held her hand. Hearing her say that changed something inside me. Anger came, but under it was a clear decision. I would not let this go. I would not let anyone treat her like she did not matter. That promise settled in me like a stone I could not drop. I told her I would fix this, that I would make sure she had what she needed, and that no one would hurt her again. Outside, life kept moving. My parents walked around as if nothing had happened. They spoke in calm voices and smiled in a way that did not reach their eyes. They acted like they had done the right thing, and that they had nothing to be ashamed of. Their faces looked smug, as if they had won something secret. They said they had made hard choices, and that sometimes adults must do difficult things. They did not seem troubled by her pain. Watching them made me see them in a new way. This was not a small cruelty. Their words and actions were part of a pattern. They had no real regret. That comfort told me something frightening. They thought they could bend the rules to fit their wishes. They would hurt people and then pretend it was for a good cause. That was dangerous. I would not meet them with fists or threats. I would not become what they were. My plan would be sharper. I would show what they had done. I would pull at threads until everything they had built came apart. I made a list in my head. I would gather proof. I would find voices that remembered the truth. I would open doors they had closed. I would take away their safety, their secrets, and the power they used to silence others. I would make their money count for less by showing how it was taken. I would make their neighbors and friends see who they were. I would not yell or break things. I would use facts, quiet people, and careful steps. When I left the hospital that day, my hands still shook, but my mind was steady. I had lost the easy belief that family is always kind. I had gained a clear path. I would fight for her with patience and truth. I would take away their hiding places and give her back her dignity. I would use paper and phone calls, quiet meetings, and legal help if I had to. I promised myself I would not stop until the truth was clear truly. I knew I couldn't move too fast. If my parents found out what I was doing, they would find a way to block me. So I started small. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I searched through drawers and cabinets. I found bank papers, receipts, and the signed forms that gave them control over Grandma's account. Each page felt like a weapon, and I made copies of everything, hiding them where they would never look. I kept my phone close whenever I was around them. They had grown used to speaking without shame, so it wasn't hard to capture their voices. I recorded their cruel remarks, the way they spoke about Grandma, as if she was nothing more than a bill to pay. Every word went into a folder I named Truth. It became my shield, proof I could use when the time came. But I knew documents and recordings weren't enough. I needed people who could stand beside me. I thought about Grandma's old friends, the ones who still cared about her, but had been pushed away by my parents. Quietly, I began reaching out. I told them what had happened, every detail, even the part about the park. Some of them cried, some grew angry, but all of them promised to support her. Their voices would matter when no one believed mine alone. The hardest step was finding legal help. I was nervous the first time I called, afraid they would dismiss me, but the lawyer I spoke with listened closely. I explained about the pension, how she had been pressured into signing it over, how she had been left with nothing. He agreed to take the case, to fight for her rights. Knowing someone professional was on our side gave me strength I hadn't felt in weeks. Through it all, I had to keep up an act. Around my parents, I smiled and nodded like the same quiet daughter I had always been. I didn't argue, didn't question, didn't show the anger burning inside me. They thought they had silenced me, and I let them keep believing it. Each day I played my part, but in my mind I was 10 steps ahead. Inside, though, the fire never left. Every time I saw Grandma's weak smile, every time I remembered her whisper about being a burden, the anger returned stronger. It wasn't wild rage anymore. It was focused. I carried it carefully, like a sharp blade I would not swing too soon. I wanted my parents to feel exposed in the light, stripped of the lies they hid behind. The plan grew piece by piece. Papers, recordings, witnesses, legal aid. Each was a brick in the wall I was building. I wasn't rushing. I was patient. Because when the moment came, I wanted there to be no escape. They would face the truth in front of everyone they tried so hard to impress. And I would be ready. I arranged the family dinner on purpose. I chose a night when relatives would gather so my parents would be surrounded by familiar faces. I carried dishes, poured drinks, and kept my hands steady while my eyes stayed on them. I wanted the room full enough that they couldn't twist things or hide behind silence. When the food was served, I slipped a remark into the chatter. "Funny how money never seems to stick around this house," I said lightly, as though it was just a thought. My mother's smile froze, her fork resting on her plate. My father gave a short laugh, forced and sharp, like someone covering a slip. The words worked the way I wanted. They unsettled them in a place where they usually felt untouchable. As the meal went on, Lorraine kept glancing at me with suspicion. She asked questions in a playful tone, but I gave her simple answers, never revealing more. Martin waved it all away, pretending my words meant nothing. His dismissal was quick, almost desperate, a sign he didn't want anyone looking too closely. That was their method: deny, dismiss, and carry on. While others chatted and passed food, I thought about the quiet steps I had already taken. I had contacted Child Protective Services, explaining how Grandma had been treated. I gave enough details to raise concern without exposing myself fully. I knew a visit or phone call from them would shake my parents and plant doubt in official records. I also mailed out packets of proof, copies of bank records, pension transfers, and receipts, to the right offices. One envelope went to my father's boss, another to Human Resources. I kept my name out of it. The numbers spoke for themselves, and I trusted they would see what kind of people my parents really were. Neighbors became part of the plan too. I mentioned small pieces of the truth to a few who had seen odd things already. One neighbor agreed to keep watch, another promised to bring it up in the community group. The more whispers spread, the harder it would be for my parents to keep their polished image intact. Slow cracks started to show. Invitations they once received stopped arriving. People who used to greet them warmly now looked away. My father was called into meetings at work. My mother's closest friend didn't return her calls. Their comfort, their carefully built circle of respect, began to shrink piece by piece. Inside, I felt a strange calm. I wasn't happy to watch them fall, but I knew it was necessary. I gathered every detail, every copy, every recording, stacking them carefully like stones in a wall. Outwardly, I kept up the act of being the quiet daughter, polite and obedient. In truth, every smile I gave them hid the storm I was guiding toward them. When the first real consequences appeared, I was ready. The seeds were already in the ground, and they were growing fast. My parents had no idea it was me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. The day of the gathering came, and I was ready. I had spent weeks preparing, collecting every document, every recording, and every word from those who had seen the truth. This time I wasn't dropping hints or planting seeds. This time, I was going to open everything in front of the people my parents tried so hard to impress. The living room was crowded with relatives and friends. My parents moved around with practiced smiles, greeting people, pretending their world was perfect. I waited until the room was full and the conversations had settled. Then I stood, my grandmother beside me. Her body was weak, but she held my hand tightly, giving me the courage to continue. I began to speak, steady and clear. At first, people looked confused, unsure why I was interrupting. Then I pulled out the stack of papers, the bank statements, the signed transfers, the proof that money had been drained from her account. I laid them out on the table where everyone could see. Murmurs spread through the room. Next came the recordings. I pressed play, and the sound of my parents' voices filled the room. Their words were sharp and cold, talking about Grandma like she was nothing but a problem, like her money was theirs to take. The room grew quiet except for the cruel laughter that echoed from the small speaker. Faces turned toward my parents, shocked. I didn't stop there. I had asked others to come forward, and they did. Old friends of Grandma spoke up, telling how she had confided in them about the pressure, how she had given more than she could afford. A neighbor confirmed seeing her left alone and helpless. Every voice added weight to the truth until it was undeniable. Finally, I said the words I had carried for so long. They robbed their own mother. They took her money, her dignity, and when she had nothing left, they abandoned her in a park like trash. My voice did not shake. I looked straight at them as the room gasped. The reaction was instant. Relatives rose to their feet, anger in their eyes. Friends whispered to each other, some covering their mouths in disbelief. A wave of outrage filled the room. My parents, usually so quick with excuses, said nothing. My father's face was pale, my mother's lips pressed tight, but neither of them could deny what was in front of them. Grandma squeezed my hand. She looked around the room, her head held a little higher than before. For the first time in a long while, I saw her shoulders straighten, as if the shame that had been weighing her down was finally lifting. By the end of the night, the change was clear. Family members who once defended my parents now turned their backs. Friends they had relied on for respect avoided their eyes. The polished image they had built was shattered in one evening, broken by the truth they could no longer hide. And I stood there, not with anger in my chest, but with a deep sense of justice. They were finally exposed, and everyone knew who they truly were. Martin and Lorraine are investigated for elder abuse and financial exploitation. Officials gather every record and every statement that proves what they did. The case is strong, and for the first time in their lives, they cannot talk their way out. They face questions they cannot answer, and the lies they built for years collapse in front of them. People who once respected them now look at them with disgust. The community whispers about their cruelty, and their proud faces begin to fade into shame. The damage does not stop with the investigation. Their jobs, which they valued so much, are taken from them. Martin is called into a meeting and walks out with nothing. Lorraine, who spent so much time chasing approval, is told not to come back to her workplace. The reputation they cared for more than family is ruined. Neighbors, friends, and colleagues all step away from them. Their social circle, once filled with people they wanted to impress, is now empty. While their lives fall apart, Grandma Eleanor slowly begins to heal. With legal support, her pension is placed back in her name. She no longer has to live in fear of losing everything she worked for. The money matters, but what matters more is the feeling it gives her. For months she had been treated like she was worthless, but now the papers show the truth. She still has rights, she still has control, and she is not powerless. The dignity my parents tried to strip from her is restored. I bring her to live with me. My apartment is small, but it becomes a safe place for her. I clear space near the window for her favorite chair, and I make sure the kitchen is full of the simple foods she likes. We share meals together, talk about little things, and laugh at memories she tells me from her younger days. The weight she carried begins to lift, and I can see her becoming herself again. In the evenings, I check on her before she sleeps. Sometimes she reaches for my hand, her fingers warm and gentle. One night, her eyes filled with quiet emotion, she said softly, "You saved me, sweetheart. I only wish I hadn't believed in the wrong people for so long." The sadness in her voice broke my heart, but her gratitude gave me strength. I told her that none of it was her fault. Trusting her children was natural, and she should never feel ashamed for loving them. The failure was theirs, not hers. What mattered now was that she was safe, cared for, and loved. She smiled then, a small, peaceful smile that made me see the strong woman who had raised me shining through again. Martin and Lorraine lost everything they thought made them important. But Eleanor regained something much greater. Her dignity, her peace, and the knowledge that she is deeply loved. For me, that was the real victory. She was no longer a burden in anyone's eyes. She was the heart of my home. It did not take long before Martin and Lorraine had nowhere else to turn. With their jobs gone and their reputation ruined, they showed up at my door. Their faces were tired, and their voices carried none of the pride they once had. They begged me to forgive them, to help them rebuild, to somehow forget what they had done. For a moment, I simply looked at them, remembering the night they left Grandma alone in that park. They spoke of regret and mistakes, but their words sounded hollow. I could see the desperation in their eyes, but I also knew the truth. They weren't sorry for what they had done. They were sorry for the price they had paid. They wanted comfort now that their world had fallen apart, the same comfort they had denied their own mother. I didn't yell, and I didn't cry. My voice was calm as I said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream could have been. Their eyes dropped, and I could tell the weight of my words had struck them harder than anger ever would. I closed the door, not with hatred, but with finality. That chapter was over. Later that night, I checked on Grandma. She was already in bed, the soft glow of the lamp casting a gentle light across her face. She looked peaceful, her breathing steady. I tucked the blanket around her shoulders, and she stirred slightly, giving me a faint smile before drifting back to sleep. Standing there, I thought about everything that had happened. Betrayal always cuts the deepest when it comes from family. The people meant to protect you are the ones who can wound you the most. My parents had proven that in the worst way possible. But I also realized something else. Revenge, when it is tied to justice, does not leave you bitter. It leaves you with closure. I hadn't destroyed them with lies or cruelty. I had simply revealed the truth. They lost everything because of the choices they made. Grandma regained her dignity because she finally had someone willing to fight for her. That balance, that sense of justice, was enough for me. As I turned off the lamp and whispered goodnight, I felt a quiet strength settle in my chest. My parents had tried to erase Grandma's worth, but in the end, she was safe, loved, and honored. That was the only ending I needed. The wounds they left would always be there, but they no longer controlled us. We had built something stronger out of the pain they caused. And as I closed the door to her room, I knew one truth more clearly than ever. Family is not defined by blood, but by love, respect, and loyalty. The betrayal was theirs, but the victory, the real victory, was ours. Hi friends. I truly appreciate you being here until the end. Remember to drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and tap subscribe for more stories. See you soon.